The first presentation will be from Mr. Taras Kulish, who is a senior business lawyer at Mills Mills LLP. So let's jump right into it. So Taras brings over 20 years of experience to the business law group at Mills Mills LLP. Before joining the Mills Mills in 2020, Taras was part of the business law group and the chair of the intellectual property section at a respective firm in Toronto. As a business lawyer and in the intellectual property sector, Taras works with a diverse clientele: app developers, ice cream and juice manufacturers, distributors, record labels, live music venues, pharmacy chains, advertising agencies, medical professionals, hospitals, internet startups, and board game creators. Taras also represents numerous churches, mosques, synagogues, and other faith-based groups, as well as many other foundations and the service organizations in the not-for-profit sector in Ontario. I've had the pleasure to work with Taras on an ongoing basis during my time at Mills Mills as well, and Taras has a unique ability to build meaningful relationships with his clients, with the goal of always setting them up for success. Taras, I leave you the audience's undivided attention.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel, for that introduction. Thank you, Denise, as well, for your introductory words, and special thanks to Ambassador Hill for starting us off, for kicking off this day 2 of this conference. And I really especially felt that several of the points that you made, Ambassador Hill, were extremely important. You spoke about Central America being different regions, and it's obviously the same thing with Canada. We are, yes, one country, but different provinces and territories, and different cultures. One could not say that Quebec is similar to Ontario. They're very, very different culturally, and as well, even the Atlantic region, the West, British Columbia. All of these are separate regions, and which have their own characteristics. I'm going to be discussing about the Canadian laws. I'm going to also be focusing on Ontario as one of the jurisdictions that we deal with. Now, I'm also a member of the Quebec Bar and the New York Bar, and I do use that in my practice. With respect to New York, I register trademarks before the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and in Canada, I've actually been privileged to register the I Love New York mark and the famous DeLorean marks from the Back to the Future film. And so let's get right into this presentation. But before we do, I thought I would leave you with, or start off with, a quote from Muhammad Ali, who says, "If my mind can conceive it, if my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it." And that's what we want to do with our business interests, in whether they be in Canada or Central America. I also felt that Ambassador Hill, your words for the importance of Canada's support for democracy were extremely important. I remember I was participating in another conference that was put on by the Ukrainian Canadian Bar Association, of which I'm part of the executive. And one of the members of the Canadian judiciary was talking to us as lawyers who were interested in another region that happened to be Ukraine, and what we could do to have an impact on democracy in Ukraine. And I think that is something that, as Canadians, as Canadian lawyers, we bring those teachings, those learnings. That's part of our DNA, and that's part of what we are trying to do when we're when we're working with our colleagues in any part of the world, and in this case in Central America. So I think that definitely it's part of our DNA. It's a bedrock of Canada, and so I certainly appreciated that that highlight. And as both Ambassador Hill stated and Denise has stated, it's the relationships which are the bedrock of these business relationships that we're looking to create. So I've got a pretty packed agenda for the next, let's say, hopefully 50 minutes. So we're going to be going through different types of business entities. We're going to be talking about, let's say, asset purchase versus share purchase, touch on employment considerations, touch on trademarks and other intellectual property, some labeling requirements, environmental legislation, and some brief words about business liability insurance. Any of these topics could take a day long to present. So this is going to be a bit of a rapid fire. So let's talk about business entities that are permitted in Canada. So there's 3 types of business entities. There's the sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporations, and we're going to go through each of those. So the sole proprietorship is an informal structure. It is easily created, and it's one of actually the most common structures which is chosen by small businesses. The Sabina is going to be talking a little bit more about the tax implications, and she'll be talking about how do the tax authorities view the business and the operator of the business. So one of the main points to remember is that the business's money and responsibilities are the owner's money and responsibilities. So there's really a unity in liability and responsibility. So there are some possibilities for tax management. If the business generates a loss, that loss can be applied to reduce income gained from other sources. And so that's one of the reasons why part-time businesses are often sole proprietorships. And then just remember, from a liability perspective, the proprietor, the owner, is personally liable for all of the debts of the business. So now partnerships. A partnership is similar to a sole proprietorship, but instead of one proprietor, there are 2 or more proprietors. So as with a sole proprietorship, there's no formal legal structure for a partnership that's required. There's often a registration that is done, but partners usually have some kind of contract between them that will govern, what are the percentages, sharing of revenues, expenses, and who does what, the tasks. And also when they're preparing their taxes, the partners, they will apply their ownership percentages to their income and expenses. And another important point to remember is that there is also personal liability for the individual partners, whether those partners are individuals or corporations. You can have joint ventures, and we'll talk about that. The third business structure then is the corporation. And corporations are, of course, a little bit more complicated as a legal structure compared to the sole proprietorship or a partnership. And the incorporation, that's where you oftentimes will hire a lawyer to help you with that. It's a process in which a separate legal entity which is owned by shareholders is formed, and so the corporation has a separate legal existence apart from the shareholders, the owners. And so There's obviously different tax and consequences. There's legal distance between the company and the shareholders. So there's tax advantages for owners, which Sabina is going to go into in the second presentation, sorry, following mine. So oftentimes the shareholders, they can also be employees of the business. And so they can be paid for their work through an employment relationship. So the incorporation, one of the main advantages of incorporation is liability protection for the shareholders with respect to the corporation's debts, and it offers, incorporation does offer some protection for the company's name. We're going to be talking later on about trademark protection, which offers another level of protection. So the officers and directors of a company, and even the shareholders, they might come and go, but in theory, a corporation, its existence is perpetual as long as it's properly maintained. So now let's talk a little bit about the distinction of incorporating provincially or federally. You have a choice in Canada, not only to set up your business in any province and to sort of physically have your head office, let's say in one province or another. You can have business activities in each of those provinces, but you can actually choose your incorporation jurisdiction. And so in most often, or often, the people will choose a provincial jurisdiction to incorporate because that's where their activities, their business activities are situated. And but oftentimes, and more, the federal jurisdiction is chosen as a jurisdiction of incorporation, and sometimes it can be for reasons of prestige, because it's felt that a federal corporation has more prestige, let's say, than a provincial incorporation. But from a legal perspective, there's no difference. There's a little bit more expense on a federal incorporation, because you will have to do what's called an extra provincial registration. You'll actually have to register in the province that you're doing business. The advantage in Ontario is that registration doesn't cost anything. When we do it, it's included in our service, and there's no government fee. There's no extra government fee from the province of Ontario. And with federal incorporation, there is also a requirement for filing an annual return, and that is also, there is an annual return requirement in some provinces, not in the province of Ontario. So when you're thinking about expanding business to Canada, one of my older heroes is Abraham Lincoln, and he says, always bear in mind that your own resolution to succeed is more important than any other. So everyone is here because they're interested in succeeding, of course, in not just in business, but in life as well. Now, some of the considerations for businesses from Central America, you have to consider whether you will set up a branch office, a subsidiary, or an affiliate. So those are the ways that a foreign corporation can conduct business in Canada. So branch office, subsidiary, or affiliate, and we will look at each one of those. So here's the branch overview. So how does it get set up? So when a branch operation is utilized, the foreign entity will be required to extra-provincially register in all Canadian provinces in which it wishes to carry out business. So if it's going to be doing business in Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, it has to register in each of those provinces. And I can tell you that the requirements are different. In my view, the requirements in Ontario are quite simple, quite quick, and takes a little bit more. There's a little bit more involved in other provinces such as British Columbia, Alberta, or even Quebec. In Quebec, there is the requirement that that the name of the that there is a French name, that there is a name in French. So the corporate name also in any province or jurisdiction can't be registered if it is the same or similar to one that's already in use in that province. So that can sometimes create a couple of problems. Again, as we had mentioned with extra provincial registration, in some provinces there's a requirement to file an annual return. So taxation, I'm going to leave the taxation issues to Sabina to discuss, but they are taxation is like a Canadian resident corporation. So let's talk about a subsidiary overview. So the if a Canadian subsidiary corporation is chosen, then what happens is that you have to register in or incorporate a new Canadian entity. There's going to be more expenses because of the cost of preparing and filing corporate returns, financial statements, hiring an accountant, and doing income tax returns in Canada. So there's a little bit more expense there, but that's part of the cost of doing business, as they say. So there are resident Canadian requirements, certainly for federal corporations. In Ontario, the old requirement for having at least 25% Canadian directors has been eliminated, and that's since July the 5th. And so, as Denise had said, that makes that's one of the considerations that a company might decide to incorporate in Ontario. If you have Canadian directors, if you have Canadian partners, then certainly you can consider having a federal corporation. If there's a concern that you might lose the Canadian directors at some point in time, then certainly consider Ontario. And so in terms of income tax, the corporation, and this is an important consideration, the new Canadian corporation will be taxed on its worldwide income. So let's do the affiliate overview. So the affiliate is similar to a subsidiary, since there is the cost of incorporating a new Canadian entity. And in this type of entity, you have to consider shareholder agreements. You have to consider, are you taking a minority stake in a corporation? And so if you are, then you have to protect your rights with the right agreements. So the words affiliate and associate are sometimes used synonymously to describe a company that has a parent company. So the parent company only possesses, let's say, a minority stake in the ownership of the Canadian company. And so a minority stake is anything that's 50% or less of the company. So in the business immigration context, Joseph will be talking about affiliates through shareholders, and so there's other considerations if immigration is also a consideration. So that's where your immigration counsel and your business counsel need to work hand in hand. So it's important to remember that these are distinct legal entities. The parent company and the affiliate company they're separate entities. So an affiliate. Okay, so now in many instances where we have FDI, foreign direct investment, then companies will create subsidiaries and affiliates rather than, let's say, a merger or an acquisition. And they'll do that in what we call the host country. That could be, in this case, Canada. And why is that done? Sometimes it's done to prevent negative stigma that can be associated with foreign ownership. So if there still is, Canadian ownership, then the public has a lower negative stigma that it's not a foreign takeover, so to speak. So let's see. Let's move on to the affiliate overview. So the affiliate is helpful because it helps you enter into a new market. Becoming affiliated with a company that is experienced in a particular market, it's a quick way to gain access to that market. And so, going the affiliate route can help you to bypass that steep learning curve and the initial substantial expenditures that come with breaking into a new market. As well, you're able to enter into a new geographic region, and brands can be kept separate. So the parent company, let's say in Central America, might have some distinctive brands which are just good for the Central American context, and there can be distinct brands that are registered in Canada for the affiliate. So the investing in an affiliate can be appealing because it's one way that that a foreign company can make an attractive investment in a foreign market, in this case, Canada. It's important when you're looking at affiliates to make sure that the synergies are good. And so this is where it comes to the importance of relationships. And sometimes, even as Ambassador Hill had stated, often these relationships are started with personal travel visits, but then you can always be on the lookout for different investment opportunities. And so, if there's good synergies between companies, then it's possible that 1 + 1 = 3 and not 2. So having another reason for having an affiliate in a foreign country, in Canada or in Central America, is that you get control over your supply chain. So if a company in Canada or a company in Costa Rica is important to the other's supply chain, then an investment in that company will help to secure that supply chain. So, companies can insulate themselves from a rise in supply costs. And, a company can also gain a competitive advantage because, that has more value than the funds they might spend to just acquire goods and services. So also having an affiliate structure can help to save on taxes, and Sabina will go into that a little bit more. One thing that I think is always important to mention in the context of Canada is that Canada doesn't have LLCs. LLCs are limited liability corporations, and these are they're not existent in Canada. And the reason why I do bring them up is because they're very popular, of course, in the United States. And so oftentimes people think that it is possible to have an LLC in Canada. What is available is what's called an LLP, which is a limited liability partnership. But this is typically for professions, so for accountants, lawyers. So the types of people that can use an LLP are a little bit more limited. So to do business, if you have an LLP in your home country, or even an LLC, you can use an LLC, but you'd have to register it extra provincially. We've talked about that. But you can't, so you can register an LLC extra provincially, but you can't set one up in Canada as a distinct entity. So that's an important point. The ULC is just as simple as the name. It's an unlimited liability company. There are ULCs in certain jurisdictions in Canada. ULCs are created by statute. Currently, they're available in Alberta, British Columbia, and Nova Scotia. And an ULC is what's called a flow-through entity. And so that means that the shareholders are liable for all the debts and liabilities of this corporation. And so that's a little bit different than a normal incorporated company where there's a shielding. So that's something to consider, but it must be considered with the advice of your accountant, and perhaps also a Canadian accountant. So let's discuss about asset purchase versus a share purchase. And so, you know, there's often a question when a company wants to do an FDI, a foreign direct investment in Canada, is whether to purchase assets or shares. And this is the same question that is asked by any business in Canada that is purchasing another company. And so there's reasons for doing either assets or shares. So let's first of all look at shares. If you're purchasing shares in a company, then it's more akin to a takeover of a company. You can purchase a minority share, as we talked about, but you can also purchase 100% of the shares of a company. If you do either, you're taking over the assets, the liabilities, and the obligations of this of the company. You're getting the goodwill as well, so you're getting the good reputation and maybe even the bad reputation of this entity. If there's environmental issues, let's say with land that the company owns, you are taking it over. So if you're doing a share purchase, it's very important to do due diligence on the company in terms of not just its accounting, but also the assets that it owns. Are there liens against the assets? Is the property subject to any environmental considerations? So a seller of shares is taxed on the proceeds of the disposal of their shares. So the buyer and the seller are going to have different considerations. And one of the benefits of buying shares is that there's continuity. So there's continuity with respect to contracts with employees, suppliers, and customers. They remain in place. You don't have to do, you don't have to reacquire your customers. There might be some change of control issues to deal with, let's say, in a leasing contract. But by and large, purchasing shares can have that benefit of continuity. So let's take a look at purchasing assets. If you're looking at a target company and you don't want all of its divisions, you can look at one specific business activity or one specific class of assets. So an asset purchase is the transfer of a specific business activity and the related assets and even possibly employees. So a buyer can, and we have an expression which is cherry pick. A buyer can cherry pick the specific assets that they want, and they can identify what liabilities that they will be taking on. So there's when you're purchasing assets, there's a number of formalities that have to be entered into, and that's one important reason to hire legal counsel, to make sure that that the assets are properly transferred. And also think about the intellectual property assets when you are purchasing assets from a business. You want to make sure that if you are getting what you think you're getting, and so it's very, very important to have an eye on the trademarks, the patents, and those kinds of assets. Purchasing assets can help to isolate your risk and and historic risk factors. So with respect to tax, a seller usually wants to sell the shares because on a share sale the seller realizes a capital gain or a capital loss, and then typically a buyer wants to purchase assets. And so there's a little bit of sometimes in negotiation, a little bit of a tug of war between the buyer and the seller, whether they're going to purchase assets or shares. And that's where it's also very important to get your accountant involved in that. So let's talk a little bit about employment considerations for foreign businesses. Ambassador Hill touched on that and said how important it is to have people with relevant experience in your company from the other jurisdictions. So if you're purchasing a Canadian company, or if you're hiring people for your business, you may want to have people in your business with language skills, cultural skills from your home country, from any of the countries in Central America that we're dealing with. So specifically, what should a non-Canadian company planning to hire in Ontario think about? So we have the Human Rights Code, and so all non-Canadian businesses planning to hire employees in Ontario should be aware that we have a particular set of workplace laws, as well as there's some important aspects of our common law. And foreign businesses can sometimes be surprised at how different our laws and rules can be when it comes to the employment relationship. So any business who's looking to employ people in Ontario really should first get advice from a qualified employment lawyer, so that they fully understand the system of laws that govern the employment relationship in Ontario. And I would say as well, get specific advice for each of the provinces. Quebec can be can have some particularities that you should be aware of. So the Human Rights Code in Ontario, the code provides that every person has the right to be free from discrimination and harassment in their employment on the basis of their race, ancestry, place of origin, their color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, age, even their criminal history, their marital status, family status, or handicap. And the obligation on employers is to accommodate. Employers, they have the ultimate responsibility for maintaining what's called an inclusive work environment that's free from discrimination and harassment. So, okay, so other laws to be considered are the Employment Standards Act, and the Ontario Employment Standards Act in particular provides for minimum terms and conditions of employment for most employees in Canada. It does not apply to federal employees. That's different. But the Act sets out these minimum standards regarding wages, hours of work, overtime, vacations, public holidays, leaves of absences, and especially important is termination of employment. When you are considering hiring somebody, very important to get up-to-date employment contracts. There has been a number of changes in the past year or two, and so if you are using an employment contract which is a few years old, really a good idea to get that updated to make sure that it meets the new requirements. And so let's move on to the next issue, which is common law and wrongful dismissal. So in Canada, there's no recognized concept of employment at will, which is a concept which is recognized in some states in the United States. And I mention this because a lot of people are familiar with the United States law. And so under our common law or judge-made law, employment can be terminated at any time without just cause, but only on the provision of reasonable prior notice of termination or payments instead of notice. And so it's not unusual for judges to routinely award notice periods in the range of 1 month for every year of employment and possibly more. They used to call that the rule of thumb, but it can be dangerous to just to think that that's the standard. It is very important if you are going to terminate somebody to seek advice from an employment lawyer who's up to date. Now, next, there's the Employment Insurance Act. And so that's a federal law. Our Federal Employment Insurance Act is applicable throughout Canada, and it's designed to provide income protection for employees who are unemployed for a variety of reasons. And so there are benefits that are available for termination, but also benefits that can be payable for periods of illness or pregnancy leave. And so both employers and employees contribute to the premiums under the Employment Insurance Act. Another important act, and you can see that there's a lot of things to be aware of as an employer. There's the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We sometimes call that OSHA. And that act requires the establishment of health and safety committees in most workplaces, and it's aimed at the prevention of workplace accidents or injuries. And so violations of this act can lead to fines because they're prosecuted as a provincial offense. and individuals and corporations can be subject to fines if found guilty, but also individuals can also face the additional risk of incarceration, meaning jail time. So it's very, very important to consider health and safety in the workplace. So there's two more acts to consider. One is the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, and it's formally known as workers' compensation. And that creates a system of compensation for workplace accidents or injuries which can occur at the place of employment. And the employer is exclusively responsible for contributing financially to this Workplace Safety and Insurance Act scheme. The other act that's important is the Pay Equity Act. And this is legislation in Ontario that's aimed at redressing the what's called the systemic gender discrimination. So that basically means that all employees should be paid for equally for work, which is of equal value. And so it can be a little bit complicated because you can have employees who are let's say working in the shop, in the manufacturing facility, and you can have employees who are working in administrative roles. And sometimes those different jobs can be split along gender lines. And so it can be tricky to make sure that that each of the jobs is compensated fairly. And the other act, the final one that we'll discuss, is the Ontario Labor Relations, and this is for unionized workers. So yes, the Ontario Labor Relations Act may not be applicable to everyone, but if you're buying a business, a company that has a union already existing, or if it's of a certain size, you have to be aware that if a union is formed, people have the right to organize themselves in labor unions, and then the Ontario Labor Relations Act will apply. So let's go into the intellectual property area. Some people will consider that IP, intellectual property, is the most valuable asset of a business. So let's talk about trademarks. I think that when you're coming up from another country and investing in Canada, it's very important to secure your marks in Canada as well as, let's say, in Central America. And if you're dealing in Costa Rica or Nicaragua or Honduras, whichever country, you might have your marks registered there, but you also have to register them in Canada. So you can have ordinary marks, certification marks. You have common law rights, and so you don't have to register your marks. You do have common law rights in Canada, which are created by use. But as I said, it's having a trademark registration gives you that added protection, because anyone can search the trademark database and they can determine whether you have rights. So if you're dealing, let's say, with franchising situations, if your company is going to be giving franchises out, for instance, then it becomes incredibly important to make sure that you register your trademarks. And registration is good in Canada for 10 years. It does need to be renewed after, actually before the 10-year period is up, you can renew. And then you get another 10 years, and you can renew indefinitely with trademarks. So what are some of the benefits? Yes, there's the trademark, the 10-year protection. You've got priority. It's across Canada. Your use is assumed. Your exclusive rights are assumed. And then as well, by registering your marks, you have an enhanced ability to enforce your trademark rights in Canada through the Trademark Act. And so, for instance, if you have a registered trademark, then you are entitled to bring a lawsuit against somebody who's infringing your mark in federal court. Otherwise, if you don't have a registered trademark, then oftentimes you would bring, let's say, an action in the courts of Ontario, in the Superior Court of Ontario. But having the ability to go into federal court is an advantage, because the judges are specialized, the process is quick, and so it is a significant advantage. You having trademarks, registered trademarks, gives the availability of monitoring counterfeit products that might be coming in at the Canadian border. And so the customs will look at goods that are coming in and make sure that if they have a trademark, that the shipper has the right to use that trademark. Plus, you do have an ability to expand to the US market. So if you register your trademark in Canada, you have 6 months under a treaty. You have 6 months to apply for your mark in the United States, and you will get the Canadian filing date if you apply for your mark in the United States within 6 months. And oftentimes, Canada is considered a jumping off point to enter into the American market. Canada can be a good test case for you, and for many of the reasons why Ambassador Hill highlighted why Canada is a good destination, and so Canada can be a type of a safe haven, if you will, to start up your North American activities and then jump off into the United States. Canada is, has the benefit of having the longest unprotected border, and so there's many advantages of dealing in Canada, registering your trademarks in Canada, and being able to use that as a jumping off point to the United States. So other benefits is it's public notice, facilitates licensing. It becomes a corporate asset that you can sell. And also in this digital world, if you have somebody has registered a .ca domain name, well, you're able to pursue them. Now, the other things currently, and the law might change in Quebec, but currently there is an exemption from the Charter of the French language in Quebec. So if you have a registered trademark, for instance, one example I like to give is the Second Cup coffee chain trademark. Well, in Quebec, they're able to use this English expression, second cup, because it is a registered trademark. Otherwise, in Quebec, the Charter of the French language requires that business names must be in French. So, let's take a quick look at patents. Patents are based on a first to file system. Patents that you get registered in the Canadian Intellectual Property Office is only valid in Canada. And a patent must be, in order to get a patent, it must be, the invention must be new, useful, and inventive. And so some of the examples of what you can patent, for instance, a product. So example is, let's say, a door lock or a composition, so a chemical composition. So let's say the lubricants that are used in door locks. A machine, so for example, a machine that makes door locks, or a process, so a method for making door locks. Process patents can be a little bit more tricky, but they are available. So what can't you patent? You can't patent some vague idea or concept, or scientific principles or theories, or methods of medical treatment. Higher forms of life cannot be patented. Forms of energy cannot be patented. But you know, the mechanics around that can be patented. So those are some of the things that can't be patented. And there is a 20-year protection with patents. Let's talk a little bit about copyrights. Copyrights is with respect to the written word. There's automatic protection when you write something, when you create a play or you create materials for your company. But you can also register it. It is possible to get a copyright registration. And so getting a certificate of registration provides a little bit more of a system of proof. And generally, the copyright lasts for the life of the author. So in Canada, this is the regime right now. It's for the life of the author plus 50 years following the end of the calendar year where they passed away. So let's talk a little bit about one of the last forms of IP, which is environmental design. And so an industrial design, I'm thinking about my next topic, but industrial design is really relates to how something looks. So it protects a product's unique appearance. If you have a new design for a kettle or a stapler or some kind of product, and it's unique, then you can get an industrial design. You'll have exclusive rights for no one can copy your design. And in Canada, it's a 15-year protection, and it also serves as a public disclosure. So let's turn a little bit to environmental legislation. That's a huge, important topic. So environmental laws are enacted in Canada by the federal government, and all 10 provinces have their own environmental laws, and as well as the 3 Northern Territorial governments of Canada. As well, municipal governments under the authority that's delegated by the provincial or territorial legislatures can also legislate locally for specific environmental issues such as noise and sewer use. So there's certainly a vast array of environmental laws. So environmental protection falls primarily under the jurisdiction of the provinces, and they more or less have similar regulatory requirements. And you know, the federal government does exercise jurisdiction over certain specific matters which could be considered pan-Canadian or across all of Canada. So let's just look at some of the important, you know, federal jurisdiction, just very, very briefly. Key federal laws relating to the protection of the environment. There's the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. There's the Fisheries Act. Something that could be very important for businesses dealing in goods and services is the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act. There's the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, and then there's the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. Other acts are migratory birds, species at risk. So there's quite a few acts which have to be considered. On the provincial side, in Ontario, for instance, it's the Environmental Protection Act and the Water Resources Act are 2 of the most important, and they're administered by the Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Every province pretty well has a Ministry of the Environment. And so the provinces, they generally regulate the discharge of contaminants to the natural environment. There is a licensing system for discharges to air, water, and land. And there's also an assessment, environmental assessment regime. So with these compliance regimes, the authorities are entitled to issue orders and prosecute environmental offenders. Now, penalties for non-compliance are specific to each jurisdiction, but they do tend to be similar across the country. And penalties can be as high as $10 million for corporate polluters, with the possibility of up to 5 years of imprisonment for individuals. So actual penalties that are given out are considerably lower. Imprisonment is rare, but nevertheless, penalties can be quite high. They may not be as high as 1 million, but they can be several hundreds of thousands of dollars. And certainly for egregious pollution, negligent pollution, then the fines can be higher. One thing to take note of in terms of the environmental responsibilities. Purchasers of land, and we did talk about this, but purchasers of land are responsible for the environmental pollution that exists on their land, even if there's an agreement of purchase and sale which specifically excludes liability. What does that mean? That means that the authorities, they don't care about any agreement that you might have in writing. They will come after you as the owner of the land. They will also go after the previous owners as well. But if they come after you, then you have the problem. You might have recourses against, let's say, the vendor of the land if there was, if they gave you environmental warranties. So that's where it's very, very important when you're purchasing land or building, anything like that in Ontario, in Canada, to do an environmental assessment. And so we have what are called phase 1 and phase 2 studies and environmental assessment studies. And phase 1 is done by qualified environmental engineer, and they will look at the history of the property, the use. They will look more at the paperwork, shall we say, and they will give you a very comprehensive report. Phase 2 studies will typically, they will dig, they will bore, they will do testing. And you know, we're currently doing a purchase of land for a church, and we've just discovered through the environmental assessments that there's about $300,000 to $600,000 in remediation costs that are required, and that's just what is known at this point in time. And the vendor has has stated that there's not going to be any participation by them in the remediation cost. That's a cost of doing business, of purchasing valuable land within the GTA. And so it's very important to know what you're getting into when you purchase property in Canada. So the second to last thing that I want to talk about are consumer packaging and labeling requirements, the Act. This is a criminal law. It requires that there are that prepackaged consumer products bear accurate and meaningful labeling information to help consumers make an informed purchasing decision. And so the Act prohibits false or misleading representations, and the Act sets out specific specifications for mandatory label information, such as the product's name, the net quantities, and the dealer identity. And it's applicable, obviously, to all foods. There's also some specific bilingual labeling requirements for English and French. And so that relates to core labeling requirements such as name and certain prescribed words or expressions for specific foods. So the final topic that I want to touch on is with respect to business liability insurance. Some businesses that we deal with coming from other jurisdictions, the insurance industry is not as developed in their country of origin. Certainly in Canada, there are all types of insurance products that are available. As business lawyers, we do recommend that you obtain business liability insurance, really for the sort of the following reasons: for protection from lawsuits, protection from unforeseen events, and consider that there's many types of insurance that you can get as a business owner, and it'll depend on many factors, including your industry, the risk, the size of your business, the revenue that you have. So some of the common types of insurance that are available, and this is not an exhaustive list, they're coming up with new products all the time, but think about commercial general liability insurance, CGL, CGL. There's professional liability insurance, and that could be, let's say, for if you're an accountant, if you're a lawyer. There's product liability insurance if you're distributing goods, commercial property insurance if you own a building, you own land, even cyber liability insurance, which of course nowadays is incredibly important. You'll also want to think of directors and officers liability insurance, especially important if you have outside directors, if you have Canadian resident directors who are coming in. Definitely you want to protect your officers and directors. So costs, and again, I'm not an insurance agent or broker. I don't represent anyone, but in Canada, it's relatively low costs. You can anticipate spending about $650 a year on a $2 million general liability policy. Again, don't quote me on that. You have to get a quote from an authorized insurance broker. Some of the factors that are taken into consideration when determining your premium is going to be your business size, the location, your years of experience, the years of experience of the business in the industry, the annual and projected gross revenue, the number of employees, and of course, very important is the insurance claims history. So that pretty well wraps it up for my presentation. I do want to leave you with a quote from Nelson Mandela, which is, "Vision without action is just a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. And vision with action can change the world." And that's what we're trying to do, is work together to change the world, to change our world in a positive way. So I just want to share with you a little bit about our business law team. We have 40 lawyers, over 40 lawyers at Mills & Mills, but we do have a good group in our business law team, and you're going to be hearing from Sabina Mexis next. And so if there are any questions, I certainly would welcome them, and want to thank you for your attention to this presentation. Thank you so much.